Boss follows worker home. What she finds changes everything. Laura Bennett had everything most people dreamed of. She was the head of a successful company in New York City, with a shiny office in a tall glass building that sparkled under the city lights. Her name was known far and wide, people admired her. Some even feared her. Laura had built her business from nothing, starting with just a small desk in her tiny apartment years ago. Through long nights, endless cups of coffee, and a fierce belief that hard work always paid off, she turned her dreams into reality. Her company, BrightFuture Tech, was now a leader in the tech world, creating apps and gadgets that people loved. Laura's office was a picture of perfection. The desks were sleek, the walls were painted a crisp white, and every corner screamed order. There were no messy papers or personal photos cluttering the space. Laura believed in focus and efficiency. Her rules were simple: work hard, deliver results, and you'd succeed. If you couldn't keep up, you were out. It was a tough way to run a company, but it had worked for years. Her employees stayed late, met deadlines, and pushed the company to new heights. Laura was proud of what she'd built, and she thought her employees were too. But lately, something felt off. Laura noticed that the energy in the office wasn't the same. The chatter and laughter that once filled the break room had faded. People looked tired, their smiles forced. Deadlines were still met, but the spark was gone. Laura couldn't understand it. She paid good salaries, offered bonuses, and expected the best. Why weren't her employees as driven as they used to be? She started to wonder if she was missing something. One employee stood out to Laura: Mark Thompson. Mark was the kind of worker Laura admired. He arrived early, stayed late, and never complained. He took on extra shifts without a word. His desk always neat, his work always done. But there was something about Mark that puzzled her. Despite his hard work, he didn't seem to shine like others. He hadn't been promoted, hadn't received the big bonuses others chased. He was steady, reliable, but stuck. Laura couldn't figure out why. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Laura sat at her desk, staring out at the glowing city skyline. Her office was quiet, the hum of computers the only sound. She glanced down at the open plan office below and saw Mark packing his bag. He moved slowly, his shoulders slumped, as if carrying a heavy weight. Laura watched as he walked out the door, his figure disappearing into the elevator. Something tugged at her, a feeling she couldn't explain. Without thinking, she grabbed her coat and scarf, slipped into her car, and followed him. Laura kept her distance, her sleek black car trailing Mark's old, beat-up sedan through the busy streets of Manhattan. The city was alive with honking taxis and flashing lights. But as they drove farther, the noise faded. They crossed into Brooklyn, where the streets grew quieter, the buildings older. Laura frowned as Mark turned onto a narrow road lined with small, crumbling houses. Some had cracked windows, others were covered in faded graffiti. This wasn't the New York she knew, with its fancy restaurants and polished skyscrapers. This was a place that felt forgotten. Mark parked in front of a worn-out apartment building. The paint was peeling, and the steps leading up to the entrance creaked under his weight. Laura pulled over a few blocks away, her heart pounding. She didn't know why she was doing this. It felt wrong to spy on her employee, but she needed to know more. She stepped out of her car, pulling her scarf tighter against the chilly evening air, and walked closer, keeping to the shadows. Through a grimy window on the second floor, Laura saw Mark enter a small apartment. The room was cramped, with a sagging couch and a tiny table covered in mismatched dishes. Two children, a girl about 7 and a boy around 5, ran to him, their faces lighting up. The girl's pigtails bounced as she hugged Mark's legs, and the boy tugged at his sleeve. Grinning, Mark held a small grocery bag, pulling out a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and a few apples. The kids grabbed the food eagerly, their eyes wide with hunger. They sat on the floor, spreading peanut butter on bread with a plastic knife, eating as if they hadn't had a proper meal in days. Laura's breath caught in her throat. She stood frozen, hidden behind a tree, watching the scene unfold. The little girl looked up at Mark and asked in a small voice, "Daddy, will you be home for breakfast tomorrow?" Mark's face softened, but his eyes were heavy with worry. "Of course, sweetie," he said, ruffling her hair. But Laura saw the doubt in his expression. The way his smile didn't reach his eyes. He wasn't sure he could keep that promise. Back in her car, Laura gripped the steering wheel so tightly her hands ached. Her mind raced. Mark Thompson, her model employee, the man who worked harder than anyone, was living like this? In a tiny, rundown apartment, struggling to feed his kids? She had always thought her employees lived well, maybe not in luxury, but comfortably. She paid them well, didn't she? But now, seeing Mark's reality, she felt a wave of guilt crash over her. How had she missed this? How had she been so blind? Laura drove home to her spacious Manhattan apartment, her thoughts a jumble. Her home was everything Mark's wasn't: clean, modern, filled with expensive furniture and art on the walls. She poured herself a glass of wine, but it sat untouched on the counter. She couldn't stop picturing Mark's kids, their hungry faces, the way they clung to their father. She had built her company on the idea that hard work led to success. But Mark worked harder than anyone, and he had nothing to show for it. Was her company part of the problem? That night, Laura barely slept. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene in her mind. She thought about her own childhood, growing up in a small town with parents who worked long hours to provide for her. They hadn't been rich, but they'd been happy. Laura had always believed she was fair, that her company rewarded effort. But now she saw the truth. She had been so focused on profits, on pushing her team to work harder, that she hadn't noticed their struggles. Mark wasn't just a worker, he was a father. A person with a life she'd never bothered to understand. The next morning, Laura woke with a new sense of purpose. She couldn't ignore what she'd seen. She needed to know more, not just about Mark, but about all her employees. What were their lives like outside the office? Were others struggling too? She decided to do something she'd never done before. She left her fancy office and drove back to Brooklyn. The neighborhood looked different in the daylight, but no less worn. The buildings were old, some with broken shutters or chipped paint. People moved slowly, their faces tired, carrying grocery bags or pushing strollers. Laura parked her car and walked the streets. Taking it all in, she saw a small park where kids played on a rusty swing set, their laughter mixing with the sound of distant traffic. She passed a corner store with flickering neon signs, where an elderly man swept the sidewalk. This was a world she'd never known, a world her employees lived in. As she walked, Laura's phone buzzed. It was a text from Mark, asking if he could meet her for lunch. His message was polite, almost too formal, as if he was nervous. Laura's heart raced. She hadn't planned to talk to him so soon, but maybe this was her chance to make things right. She agreed to meet at a small cafe in Brooklyn, a cozy place with checkered tablecloths and the smell of fresh coffee. Laura arrived early, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her napkin. The cafe was quiet, with only a few customers sipping coffee or reading newspapers. When Mark walked in, he looked the same as always, neatly dressed, his posture straight, but his eyes were tired. He sat across from her, offering a small smile. "Thanks for meeting me, Ms. Bennett," he said, his voice soft. Laura took a deep breath. "Mark, I need to be honest with you. I followed you last night. I saw where you live. Saw your kids." Her words tumbled out, and she saw Mark's face tighten, a mix of surprise and discomfort. "I didn't know, Mark. I didn't know you were struggling like that. I'm so sorry." Mark looked down at his hands, his fingers twisting together. "You don't need to worry about me, Ms. Bennett. I'm just doing what I have to for my family. Lots of people have it worse." Laura shook her head. "No, Mark, that's not okay. You work so hard for my company, and you shouldn't have to live like this. I've been so focused on the business, on making it successful, that I forgot about the people who make it happen. I want to change that." Mark's eyes widened, a flicker of hope mixed with doubt. "Change? What do you mean?" "I want to make sure everyone at BrightFuture is treated fairly," Laura said, her voice firm. "You shouldn't have to choose between your job and your kids. No one should." She leaned forward, her heart pounding. "I don't know exactly how yet, but I'm going to fix this. For you, for your kids, for everyone." Mark was quiet for a long moment, his expression softening. "I'm barely keeping it together, Ms. Bennett," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I just want my kids to have a better life. They deserve that." Laura felt tears prick her eyes. She reached across the table, her hand hovering near his. "They do, Mark, and I'm going to make sure they get it. I promise." The rest of their lunch was quiet, but something had shifted. For the first time, Laura felt like she was seeing Mark as a person, not just an employee. She listened as he talked about his kids, how his daughter loved to draw, how his son wanted to be a soccer player. She realized how much she'd missed by keeping her distance from her team. When Laura returned to her office that afternoon, she felt different. The view of the city skyline, once a symbol of her success, now reminded her of the people who worked for her. People like Mark who deserved better. She called her assistant, Sarah, into her office. "Sarah, I need you to do something for me," she said, her voice steady. "I want a report on our employees. How many are working extra shifts? How many have families? Are any of them struggling to get by? I need to know the truth." Sarah blinked, surprised. "Are you sure, Ms. Bennett? That's a lot of information." "I'm sure," Laura replied. "We've treated our employees like numbers for too long. They're people. Sarah, it's time we started acting like it." The next day, Laura faced her board of directors in the sleek conference room. The table was lined with serious faces. Men and women in sharp suits, all waiting to hear her latest plan. David Carter, a senior investor, leaned forward. "Laura, the quarterly numbers are solid. What's on your mind today?" Laura stood, her hands steady on the table. "We've built an amazing company. But we've forgotten something important, our employees. I've learned that many of them are struggling, working long hours just to survive. We can't keep pushing them without caring about their lives. I want to change how we do things." The room went silent. David raised an eyebrow. "Change? Laura, our focus on efficiency is why we're successful. You want to risk that?" "I'm not saying we stop being successful," Laura said, meeting his gaze. "I'm saying we can do better. We can build a company that's successful and fair. Our employees deserve that. If we don't take care of them, we'll lose them, and we'll lose what makes this company great." The board members exchanged glances, some nodding, others skeptical. Laura knew it wouldn't be easy. Changing a company's culture was a big task, and not everyone would agree. But she was ready to fight for it. She thought of Mark's kids, their hopeful faces, and knew she couldn't go back to the way things were. Over the next few weeks, Laura worked tirelessly. She met with employees, listened to their stories, and learned about their lives. She introduced new policies, flexible hours for parents, better health benefits, and a fund to help employees in financial trouble. She promoted Mark to a higher role, giving him a raise that let him move his family to a better apartment. Slowly, the office began to change. People smiled more, worked with new energy. The company was still successful, but now it felt human. Laura wasn't sure if she'd fixed everything, but she knew she was on the right path. She'd learned that success wasn't just about money or power. It was about the people who made it possible. And for the first time in years, she felt proud, not just of her company, but of herself.